Well, good morning or afternoon or evening, whenever you may be watching this. This is a brief synopsis, if you will, of what we would have talked about Monday evening and Tuesday morning if we would have had uh, class on Tuesday morning. I know that the weather was not the best, and for the safety of you all, we decided to go ahead and cancel it. But I figured I would not leave those who would likely attend on Tuesday in the void or in the dark about maybe what was discussed as a realm of a discussion, as a realm of getting some things just across. Certainly, if you have read the introduction and the first chapter of this specific book, Blessed Be His Name, it does kind of give a fairly good synopsis about where we are heading, and as well, ultimately, the first chapter, what is in a name. This book in and of itself, the reason why I chose it in and of itself was I chose it because we had about 6 weeks and we could legitimately get it done. I think it has roughly about 7 chapters and then a conclusion, which we could probably read at the end of things. But with an introduction to be able to talk about it, and as well the ability to go ahead and get it done in the time frame, would have liked to have done other books as well, but they are 8, 10, 15-week studies, and we just did not have the time, given when Ash Wednesday and Lent would go ahead and begin this time of year. So what we're going to do is we'll go over kind of the high points and things that I want to bring out regarding both the introduction and the first chapter. Maybe talk a little bit about the discussion questions that are at the end of each chapter, and just hit some of the high points of those. We are not going to go through everything, perhaps, like we did specifically on Monday evening, and that's just given we don't have the people to be able to maybe ask discussion questions or questions that are on topic, but maybe a little different context of things. So bear with me, and in short order, we'll be able to get this going, and hopefully, Lord willing, with the weather, that we would be able to continue to meet as per usual in this. In regards to this as well, we hope that this would be able to be seen on the YouTube page. We may also put a link as well on our Facebook page. But if you needed to have a reminder, we could certainly go ahead and do that in due time, how to get to the YouTube page and things of that nature. But it will be uploaded for you to be able to look at and see at any point in time as a short synopsis. So as we dive into this, one of the biggest things that we can look at, I had spoken to the group on Monday evening, and one of the things that I can attest to is that I was watching a podcast specifically about guitars, and this was a very informative, enjoyable interview that I was watching about amps, about certain pickups on an electric guitar, different pedals, and various other facets of electric guitar playing. And it was a lot of fun to listen to and read, and I knew that I was in the midst of trying to go ahead and look this over to be able to present this and to write a couple of things down to discuss prior to our first meeting. And as I was watching this podcast, as I was watching this video, one of the things that really stood out to me was I pretty much picked up the book to go ahead and start reading. And within the first paragraph, in and of itself, it talks about a certain, be it podcast or watching something. And the phrase came out, Christ. And I pretty much almost as I was reading that, I was watching this video, and this video said something to the effect of that this guitar, the sound, I was trying to make a certain note hit, and I missed the note. But as a result, I went ahead and I hit this note, and I was like, Jesus, this is amazing. And it was almost exactly the same time that in this first paragraph, the author, Reverend Kevin Golden, writes about this brother pastor of his hearing this word Christ. I mean, almost simultaneously. It was just like, whoa, light bulb going off. I also spoke about in one of my favorite movies of all time, Back to the Future. George McFly is currently being talked to by his son, though he doesn't know it's his son at the time. Back in 1955, Michael J. Fox's character, Marty, goes ahead and talks and tries to go ahead and formulate this plan to talk to Biff Tannen about his future wife, to stand up for her, to stick up for her, and things of that nature. And Marty tells him to say a certain thing to go ahead and rile Biff up and to stand up for his wife, soon to be Lorraine. And he says, hey, you, get your bleeping hands off her. And then he asks, do you really think I ought to swear? To which Marty says, yes, George, God blanket. And it really made me think in a lot of cases. It didn't think of it as much as a kid, but as I got older, the blatant disregard for God's name is rampant in our culture today. Reverend Golden wants to go ahead and just show how words ultimately in today's world, and it's been for numbers of years, just thrown around without second thought of any rhyme or reason or understanding. And this pastor that he knows, well, he was offended. And he goes and he talks to the FCA, and the FCC, and says, ultimately, this is wrong. This should be reported. To which the FCC stated, there's no lines crossed. It's fine. The government says it's fine. It's fine. Obviously, that doesn't sit well with us. If we were to think about our own names, and if somebody screws up, they go ahead and insert, instead of what adults or a goofball or klutz, all of a sudden it's using our names. Oh, what a Dan. That seems odd. And if it continues to happen and happen and happen, it almost seems offensive after a while. It's incredibly difficult. You hit a hand with a hammer as you're trying to nail something, and you say, oh, Kevin, as the author states. That's not going to sit well. Over time, it becomes saturated and saturated and saturated and offensive and divisive and difficult to hear our own names being used in such traumatic ways, misguided, inflammatory, and insensitive ways. We have a problem with it over time. God's the same way. He's quite serious about his name. So much so that he tells of his name. And he speaks of it in Exodus 20 and the 10 Commandments. Everything in these commandments speak to not only who God is, but how we are to respect his name. And so as we move forward into the realm of the introduction and other things of that nature, the time frame of all of this shows the realm of how much scorn and disdain we would have if somebody were to improperly, consistently use our name. A way that I can liken this is we desire, when we hear our name, to be present. We hear our name. Boom, boom, boom. Thankfully, as of this point in time, you as church members and as well numbers of others, out of respect and kindly, if you see me, you may refer to me as Pastor or Pastor Dan, in and of itself, in an informal situation, which is grateful from my end that you do that. But I can attest, currently on our church council, we have comprised myself, a vice president, and head trustee, who are all Dan. You put us in a room together, even if there's 15 people, somebody says Dan, we're all going to look up. Which one? Our names are always synonymous. Another way that I can describe it is currently in my life situation, we have 2 young kids at home who certainly know how to say both my name and my wife's name, mom, dad, all that. And constantly there's this tension sometimes of daddy, 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 daddy. And you want to try and be in both places, but you just kind of, you get so worried because you want to be present in each spot and you can't. Now, that's not stating that God can't be present in all those. But how many of those times that God's name is invoked and he is called because he is present are instances where they are inflammatory or divisive usages? We talk about this and the importance of God's name. The first commandment, I am the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods before me. Right then and there, God gives his identity. I am your God, you shall have no other gods. And he gives this for a reason. And in fact, when we talk about the commandments with the catechism kids, adult education, Bible studies, anything of that nature, there's a reason why one is one. It states who God is. When we think about it, somebody asks, who are you? And we go ahead and we state our name. I am such and such. And yet when we talk about this, God is stating in and of itself, this is who I am. And to let it be known as well, God has a very specific way that he is calling people to remember it. Not just, I am, this is who I am, but also, I am who I am, which is actually the name of the Lord. I am. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But as well, a generalized aspect in the second commandment, respect who I am and my name as a result. So everything that we have in all the commandments flows out of this number one commandment. It's why it's number one. And we talk about it in various different ways, that if we break any of the 10 commandments, what are we first breaking? We are breaking the first command. But of course, second takes priority of all the others because, again, it focuses us, again, back to who God is. Who is he? He is God. He is I am. He is the Lord. He is the provider, the creator, the sustainer of all things. He is our Savior. And so as a result, we are called to deal with him and his name in respect. Not because it's just some good thing that we should do, but if we remember, who gave these commandments? God did. And so as a result, we need to respect that because he has given that to us. For instance, somebody maybe has a name, a very, very strong name, like Tyler Jeffrey. But don't call me Tyler Jeffrey, call me TJ. When somebody gives those instructions, we listen to them. Don't call me this. My name's Daniel, don't call me Danny. You know, those types of instances. And we probably know people in which that's the case. God is doing the same. He's saying, this is who I am, this is my name, and respect it. And so as we get into this, whether it be in Exodus 20, in Deuteronomy 5, Leviticus 19, or 24, or even moving into the Gospels, God's name was always to be held in high regard, to be in the highest esteem. And it's why when Jesus goes ahead and invokes the name of the Lord within the midst of teaching, within the midst of the miracles, even doing the miracles in the midst of the Pharisees and the Sadducees and all those, and he says and invokes the name of the Lord, which, if you will, this is the Hebrew version, reading right to left, Yahweh, or Yahweh, as we would define it today. I am is what Jesus is saying. And it was very serious. It was a very serious offense. God's name was not to be spoken outside of the context of worship, outside of the context of what God had given. And we see that God's name was always meant to be held in high regard, and the severity for taking his name was punishable. Punishable even among others as death. When we think about this word in and of itself translates into the name. We hear it first in the burning bush. Moses says, "Who am I to say sent me?" And he says, "I am sent you." And this is exactly what Jesus says. That word, "I am," was such a big thing. If we remember back with the Pharisees in the realm of how angry they got, probably the moment in time when it really transitioned into the fact of, okay, we must punish this man. Jesus talking with the Pharisees and talking about Abraham. And yes, I remember Abraham. And I have spoken with Abraham and things of this nature. And they stated in and of itself, wait. Abraham has been gone for this many years, and you're telling us that you have spoken, or you know him, or you've discussed things with him? And Jesus says, before Abraham was, I am. And that made the blood of the Pharisees boil, because now, as at this point in time, they felt that Jesus was misappropriating and using the name of God in a blasphemous way, in a way that was uncalled for, irresponsible, and he needed to be punished, which was exactly what they were taking to be the reason why they would then go ahead and crucify him. But we also see Jesus, in a lot of cases, speak reverently, speak with respect regarding God's name. In fact, in the moment when Jesus is teaching the disciples to pray, we have first this almost same understanding. He says, and when you pray, pray like this in the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven. We are seeing who God is. Hallowed be thy name. Or holy is your name. Now that word holy, very simply put, holy means set apart. An easy way for us to discuss this in what I spoke about on Monday evening. At your house, maybe when you bake or when you cook or whatever it may be, do you have a specific burner that you use? If you will, I don't want to say a holy burner, but a burner that you state, that is the burner I want to use consistently. And I can attest, we have our two front burners. One is a quick boil burner, and one is just a normal burner. And the quick boil is great in some regards, but it's at times temperamental. It's hard to go ahead and get the exact temperature that you want, which at times could create a lot of havoc in some regards, especially if you're doing something like melting butter or whatever it may be. It can be a little difficult. So we typically, that front right burner, we use specifically for a lot of things. It's the same way. We are setting apart, if you will, a specific burner, or maybe a child has a specific toy that they put away that is set apart. It's that same exact notion of which we are dealing with. And so as we hear Jesus speak to the effect, hallowed be your name. Your name is to be respected and kept holy. It teaches a multitude of things. Of course, the Lord's Prayer teaches all sorts of things within the petitions. Daily bread and forgiveness and keeping away from temptation and saving us from evil. But everything in and of itself flows out of who God is, his name, and how we are to holy it or keep it holy in and of itself. The difficult thing is that our sinful nature doesn't exactly do that. We have ultimately, in some regards, be it in movies, in TV shows, in everyday conversation, the Lord's name has been defiled, and we have almost been so desensitized to it in that regard. If you will, even 3 little letters these days that have been almost, to some extent, used without even thinking. OMG. Of course, some think, oh, well, it's oh my goodness, but it was begun to go ahead and be a way to state that without actually saying it. Things become such commonplace that we go ahead and we lose meaning and purpose. And so there's so much to unpack in all of this. And we go ahead and we take care of a number of various different things when it comes to speaking well and respecting our neighbor in the 8th commandment, not slandering him or hurting his reputation, giving respect to them in who they are and what they do, no matter what. God is no different. There's a good reason for each of us to not only guard and protect our own name, but there's even more reasons to protect God's name. And so as we hear and we will see, we will unpack Yahweh, and he talks about this word, this personal name of God, and the proper name of God, if you will. But there are so many other titles that we will go ahead and discuss over the given weeks. And so that is what this intro is regarding. And obviously, some of the discussion questions kind of get into the realm of using a handout that we gave to talk about the first and the second commandments. How does the second commandment illustrate the importance of God's name? And it shows that it attaches the respect that is due it. And we talk about that the respect is given because it's not just the respect that we are to show on an account of our own personal viewpoint. God himself gives it to you. And so if you will, again, the realm of Daniel is my name, do not call me Danny kind of mentality. If it's coming from the source, we take heed and make sure that it is adhered to. Another question is the hallowing of God's name. How does that teach us of the Lord and in first importance? And that's the aspect that everything that we have flows through God's name. There are so many other things that I'm not going to go ahead and get into for the sake of time, but that would be the introduction portion. As we move forward into the second part, the first chapter, he speaks to the realm of Romeo and Juliet. And truth be told, that first kind of page and a half, I think that's the longest of Romeo and Juliet I've ever actually read. We watched a movie, yes, and I guess I paid attention when I was a freshman in high school, but I can't say that I officially fully read it, if you will. But of course, we know the story of Romeo and Juliet quite well. Star-crossed lovers, blinded by a number of things, but their names are powerful, specifically all too powerful because, well, oil and water happens, except for Montagues and Capulets. They do not mix. You can't escape a family name. The Bible speaks a little further about the realm of the significance that a name possesses. That a name not only defines perhaps a person to others, our names, that's the first thing we go ahead and we give, but it also defines us personally and defines us as to our relationship with God. Ecclesiastes chapter 7, it writes that a good name is better than precious ointment. A lot of times for our names, though, there's a lot to live up to. A good name has value and it follows you. Even long after our final breath, our legacy, the respect given that name can be given for many years on an account of a given name. When we talk about a last name, there's a lot to live up to. Perhaps prestige and notoriety, responsibility, reclaiming it if it's a negative persona in that. If we think that there isn't much in a name and the aspect of losing prestige and things of that nature. I think an example of this would be Prince Harry. He had everything in that regard, prestige and notoriety and everything of that nature. And if you will, became perhaps more of a commoner or in the recent years. And if you will, has lost a lot of notoriety because of it. A name follows us. And a good name has value, not just for the present, but for the future. And he speaks to this in regards to a good name being valued in Scripture to as well reflect why it's named a certain way. Excuse me. One of the examples that he uses is the Smiths. Typically were named after blacksmiths, and as well a miller typically was named because they were a miller of some sorts. Now, obviously, we have some millers in the congregation. I would guess probably in some regards you could ask, but I don't think that it would go that far back that they may actually be that. But who knows? Personal names reveal less about a person if we're then talking as well about a certain type of name that, well, can be considered for both male and female. But Scripture also invests the importance of a name with much more meaning and the aspect of naming something. We talk about, and the example that he uses in the midst of the dream with Jacob's ladder and things like that, he names the place Bethel, which is house of God. And I always find that so unique because Bethel, which is house of God, obviously that looks very, very unusual because typically when we see Bethel, we always want to go ahead and put Bethlehem, right? And that's actually where we get this. House of God, but also hem is bread. So in fact, where Jesus was born, who also has stated that he is the bread of life, who gives his body and blood for the life of the world, he is born in a place that's God's house of bread. It's a beautiful way of speaking God's name and showing the authority of that. But also there's the realm of the face of God in Peniel. There's also numbers of places where things are named. An example of this, from my end, Bales Road. Okay, from my end, not being someone who grew up here or really was around the area much when I was here earlier, did not understand Bales Road and where that was. Another example of this was when I was in North Dakota. You went on Route 37 for about 8 miles. And then in order to go to the country church that I served, Lucky Mound, you had to turn left onto a dirt gravel road. Fine, well, and good, but the first few times that I went there, everybody kept telling me to go and turn onto Kings Highway. And I was trying to make sense of it because I didn't really know the area or anything of that nature. And all I saw was that when I was driving out, there was something that was kind of there that showed State Route 2. And I turned left, and wouldn't you know it, I got to Lucky Mound. But it was known as Kings Highway. And over the years, I found out, why is it named Kings Highway? I didn't know if it was like the richest person in Montreal County, or if it was a great farmer, or some sort of battle story. At the end of the day, it was just on the corner of one of the roads. A family, last name King, was the people who lived there. That's all it was. Suffice to say, names are important, and naming things in areas are important as well. I'm sure we have that all around the area, and I'm still learning and figuring that out. But nonetheless, names are important. Naming things are important. Naming things shows an act of authority. And we see that in a lot of cases. Names and people are named after things or have things named after them. We think of bridges and roads and museums and wings of hospitals and gymnasiums and concert halls and so many other things. The aspect of exercising authority to have something named after them is one not taken lightly. And this authority does not necessarily define somebody as superior. It's just simply the aspect of a name. And he brings to light the realm of Adam and Eve. Adam, the one who names, who's given the authority to name all the animals, name Eve herself. It isn't an aspect that Adam is superior than Eve. In fact, we hear that. We hear that in how Eve was even created. That Eve was created, yes, out of the rib of Adam, but the same substance, the same dirt she was formed by, the same exact way. And notice it was not from the head that she would lord over him, or from the foot in which he would go ahead and step all over her, but from the rib, the side, to show equality, equals. In fact, we see that as Adam names Eve. When we talk about Adam naming Eve, the original word that Adam is named is ish, which would be man. And when he goes ahead and names Eve, calls her woman, or Isha, which shows that the same equal substance understanding is exactly the same. It's just the feminine version of the same thing. We see that because in a lot of cases, there's an ever-present reality for the realm that employs naming something, or the authority of that shows superiority, and that's never to be the case. Unfortunately, with mankind, we struggle with that because we think in a lot of cases, naming something and having this authority means that you are to lord it over everybody. That's what mankind does. And so Jesus himself is very, very careful. And we need Christ's teaching in regards to authority. So that way it's not a power play or an ability to establish or enforce rules over another. That's not how the Lord calls it at all. The Lord calls out that authority should be one of service, caring for one another, providing for one another. This shows itself not just as a husband and wife. A husband is to love his wife as Christ loves the church. Pastors are called to love their congregations, love their people, and give themselves up for them as what Christ did, laying down his life. A parent to a child, in the same way, sacrificing time and energy and resources and finances and other things for the sake of their children. This is what an authority is to be. Caring for them, providing for them. And this is why the importance of a name and naming is also important, because he brings into the light that names reflect reality. And so we take the realm of personal identities. A parent has a huge responsibility. And not just the 18 years, but you know what? One of their first responsibilities, on top of maybe making sure that a nursery is ready, I can tell you that there was a lot that changed for me in the aspect of becoming a father and a parent. But there wasn't as much stress, I feel like, as trying to figure out a name. I'm glad that it took 9 months to do that, because there was a lot for our children to have to kind of go through. We wanted to keep it biblical, wanted something that our families hadn't used already, but also at the same time, we wanted to make it something that fit. And Luke had a fairly easy time, we did, with landing on Luke. Faith was a little different. Faith was a bit different because we had a few names in and of itself, and the blessing of life together is that we both knew of names that would be good, that would fit well, that would be biblical, but also we struggled with some names because we didn't know if they would fit the build, or maybe we had past experience with somebody of that name that we didn't really know if we wanted to call them that. In fact, even in the midst of, we had our idea on maybe a couple of names with Faith. And when she was born, we looked at her and we were like, oh, she's a Faith. I don't know if maybe you have some of the similar stories in and of itself, but names give a personal identity. And when we talk about that, there's an aspect of personal identity for numerous people in the realm of maybe keeping their legacy going, a number of things that can be selfish for a parent to name a child to make it so unique that it also, at the same point in time, makes it a burden for the child over the years. Your responsibility is to go ahead and name that child. And maybe that's our personal identity. That will carry with us the entire length of our lives. The Bible, the scripture, gives us many indicators, if you will, of one's name and the central identity to who they are from the Lord. If you will, I will go ahead and erase this. The word El, which is a word for God. We see it in such words, or names, I should say, as maybe Elijah or Elisha, Daniel, Gabriel, and then as well another one, or Jah, which is another word for Lord or a God. It's where we also hear like the phrase Alleluia. Halle means praise, Yah, God, praise God. So Yah immediately, like maybe Isaiah or Jeremiah, those are in and of itself the words of God, in and of itself being central to the name of somebody. But also the gravitas of the scripture also shows the name and what separates us from the rest, that God himself makes him separate from his name. That's not the case with God. His name and who he is are parallel. The bond between who God is and his name are inseparable. And he is present wherever his name is to be found, which again harkens back to what we talked about in the blatant misuse of God's name, and the aspect that he is present wherever his name is. His name is holiness. His name is called upon with respect and reverence, and whenever it isn't, he still shows up. And it's just a nature of constantly being used in a negative, horrible, terrible thing. This is why the realm of misuse is so important to refrain from. It's why the name of Christ is spoken of as not just any name, but we hear the name above all names, and we hear that they were sacrificed or that they were persecuted in the midst of the name. It's not just any name, it's the name, namely Christ. Wherever his name is, he is. And we hear that to Jesus' effect when he says, wherever two or three are gathered in my name, there I am. You see the aspect of what a name is and how important it is. This last paragraph, I believe, in the first chapter is always, I think, a huge thing. And I'm going to quick read it to you kind of as a closing. It says, an anonymous God is no God at all, for it's undefined and unable to be found. An anonymous God also dwells in shadows, never being revealed. But the one true God has made himself known by the virtue of his name, Yahweh. And with that name, he blesses you. In that name, we trust, because in that name, he is present for you. As we join over the next number of weeks, we will look at the realm of how important not just names are, but the name of God in various different situations. For next week, we will be looking at the second chapter specifically, with God as my witness. So I would invite you to take a look at that, read through that. And if you have any questions in that regard, please feel free to write them down, and we can hopefully discuss them at a later date. Hopefully as well next week, I do believe in the Lutheran Study Bible, there is a section that is known and has the names of God. and it has maybe L or A attached to a number of them. And we will look to what that means, or some of those mean, perhaps at a different time. If you have any questions, please let me know. I appreciate looking at this, and we look forward to seeing you again next week on Monday at 7 p.m. or on Tuesday at 10 a.m. Thanks, everybody, for watching. God's blessings. Peace be with you. Bye-bye.